June 6, 1944, so 15 hours. Strong point WN62, Omaha Beach. Grenadier Heinrich Severloh carefully wiped down the barrel of his MG-42 machine gun inside the concrete bunker facing the channel. In his pocket, he kept a letter from his girlfriend in Metzingen, who promised she would wait until Germany had achieved final victory. Just 3 days earlier, he had written back to her with confidence, "The invasion will be their grave. We will drive them into the sea within hours." Field Marshal Rommel himself had inspected the defenses at Omaha. The Desert Fox looked through Seal's gun aperture, studied the interlocking fields of fire, and nodded in approval. "When they come," Rommel had said, "this beach will become their cemetery." Through the narrow embrasure, Seal now saw only the calm, dark waters of the channel. The night was quiet and almost peaceful. But within 12 hours, this young soldier would be found sobbing inside the same bunker, surrounded by 13,500 empty shell casings, his machine gun barrel bent from overheating. He would be staring at an invasion force so massive his mind could barely process it. Seal later claimed to have inflicted between 1,000 and 2,000 casualties. Historians, however, see this as impossible. Total American losses on Omaha Beach from all causes were roughly 2,400. The true measure of German defeat would not be written in strategy papers, but in the shocked accounts of defenders who watched the largest amphibious assault in history unfold before their eyes. The Atlantic Wall stretched 2,400 miles from Norway down to the Spanish border. German propaganda boasted that it was the strongest defensive line ever built. Along the Normandy coast, 58 divisions of varying quality held positions built with 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 2 million tons of steel. Hitler had personally declared the fortifications unbreakable. At Omaha Beach, preparations appeared to justify that confidence. According to the U.S. Army Center of Military History, the defenses included 8 concrete bunkers, 35 pillboxes, 4 artillery emplacements, 18 anti-tank gun positions, 45 rocket launcher sites, 85 machine gun nests, and 6 mortar pits. The shoreline itself had been transformed into a trap. In the tidal zone, the Germans planted 3,700 obstacles, Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, and wooden stakes tipped with teller mines. Behind the beaches, 5 million landmines were laid. Rommel had wanted 60 million. Colonel Ernst Goth, in command of the 916th Grenadier Regiment near Bayeux, calculated the firepower at his disposal. His 4 artillery batteries could, in theory, fire 120 rounds per minute into the beach sectors. Combined with other batteries, German defenses could concentrate enormous fire on any landing. But these calculations assumed unlimited ammunition, a fatal misjudgment. On June 5th, weather across the channel seemed to guarantee safety. Luftwaffe meteorologist Walter Stumpf in Paris had declared conditions impossible for invasion. Winds reached 20 to 25 knots, waves rose up to 6 feet, and cloud ceilings hung at only 500 feet. Using reports from U-boats and weather stations, Stumpf assured High Command that the storm would last at least 2 weeks. Confident in this forecast, many German leaders left their posts. Rommel himself departed for Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday, carrying a pair of gray suede shoes he had bought in Paris. General Friedrich Dullmann, commander of the 7th Army, ordered his division officers to attend war games in Rennes. Naval patrols in the Channel were cancelled due to rough seas. That misplaced meteorological confidence would become the Germans' first critical mistake. Unknown to them, the Allies had weather stations in Greenland and reconnaissance flights over the Atlantic. Their data revealed a 36-hour break in the storm. Group Captain James Stagg identified the window, and Eisenhower seized the opportunity. At 23:15 hours on June 5th, German radar stations along Normandy detected unusual signals. Freya and Würzburg radar sets picked up huge aerial formations approaching from the north. Operators dismissed it as another Allied deception raid, meant to keep German forces on edge. By 0:30 hours, June 6th, the situation shifted. Reports poured in of paratroopers landing across Normandy. The accounts made no sense. Some claimed they were British, others American. Some reported drops to the east, others to the west. Dummy paratroopers fitted with firecrackers, part of Operations Titanic and Rupert, deepened the confusion. Major Hans von Luck, commander of the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, grasped the truth quickly. Woken with reports of paratroopers near his positions, he asked for permission to counterattack. Division headquarters responded, "Do not move until the situation clarifies." Von Luck later wrote in his memoirs as a Panzer commander, "I knew at that moment we were doomed." The paratroopers were clearly marking landing zones. Every minute we delayed gave them time to organize. But we were frozen by our own command system. By 0530 hours as dawn broke over the channel, German observers reported a sight beyond imagination. Erwin Verloor, whose exact presence remains debated by historians and even by Heinrich Severloh himself, was credited in some accounts as one of the first to report it. But across Normandy, every forward observer saw the same thing, the horizon covered with ships. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. The sea looked like a carpet of steel. The invasion fleet numbered 6,939 vessels. According to Allied records, 1,113 warships, 4,026 landing craft, 736 auxiliary vessels, and 864 merchant ships. It was the largest naval armada ever assembled. For German soldiers raised on propaganda about Allied weakness, the sight was crushing. Bernhard Furking, an artillery officer at WN-62 who would be killed later that day, reportedly told his men, "We are watching the entire world arrive on our doorstep." At 0535 hours, the naval bombardment began. The defenders had faced the Eastern Front. They had endured heavy RAF raids, but nothing had prepared them for the storm of fire that now rained down. The battleship USS Texas fired 255 14-inch shells at Point du Hoc in just 34 minutes, according to records from the Naval History and Heritage Command. HMS Warspite, the first ship to open fire on D-Day at around 0500 hours, unleashed more than 315 15-inch shells during the first 2 days. On June 9th alone, it fired 96 rounds against German positions. The combined bombardment from the Allied fleet was unlike anything the Wehrmacht had ever faced. Accounts preserved in the German Federal Archives describe concrete bunkers, built to withstand any assault, splitting apart under the weight of the naval guns. Soldiers were buried alive by collapsing defenses, dug out and then buried again as the shells kept falling. The effect on morale was as crushing as the physical damage. Structures the Germans believed unbreakable were collapsing around them. As the shelling pounded the coast, the Luftwaffe's weakness became clear. Oberst Josef Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, was ordered to strike the invasion fleet with his entire force. His reply, written in the unit's war diary, was bitter. "What entire force? I have 2 planes." The Luftwaffe, once promising to dominate the skies, managed just 319 sorties on D-Day. In contrast, the Allies flew 14,674 missions. According to U.S. Navy intelligence reports, Priller and his wingman Unteroffizier Heinz Vodarczyk made the only German air attack on the beaches that morning. Flying F-908 fighters, they strafed Sword Beach once before retreating from overwhelming Allied fighter patrols. This lone attack by 2 planes against an invasion fleet of thousands quickly became a symbol of Germany's helplessness. The Knights of the Air had been reduced to a single desperate gesture. At 0630 hours, the first assault waves came ashore. Despite the devastating bombardment, German defenders still held their positions and opened fire. What followed shocked even seasoned soldiers. Heinrich Severloh, the machine gunner at WN-62, began firing at 0635 hours. His bunker, one of the few positions left mostly intact, had a perfect line of fire across Omaha Beach. In his 2005 memoir WN-62, Erinnerungen an Omaha Beach, Severloh recalled firing 13,500 rounds over 9 hours. While he claimed to have caused massive casualties, historians caution that exact numbers cannot be confirmed. Still, his MG-42, firing 200 rounds per minute in short bursts, played a deadly role in the bloodshed that earned Omaha its grim name. German troops soon faced what military historians later called material shock, the mental collapse that comes from being confronted with overwhelming force. No matter how many Allied soldiers were hit, more kept coming. Every destroyed landing craft was replaced by several more. Every German position silenced was drowned out again by naval fire that felt endless. By midday, reports of ammunition shortages spread across German defenses. Their plans had been drawn up for a limited assault, not for a full-scale invasion. Wehrmacht supply logs showed that some positions, stocked with enough ammunition for 3 days of battle, burned through everything in just a few hours. Artillery batteries critical to the defense were also running dry. The 21st Panzer Division, The only armored unit close to the beaches did not receive orders to attack until 1,000 hours, 4 hours after the landings began. When they finally moved at 1620 hours, they pushed between British airborne zones toward the coast. Divisional records state they reached the shore between Léon-sur-Mer and Luc-sur-Mer around 1900 hours. They were the only German armored formation to reach the beaches on D-Day, but their advance was short-lived. At 2100 hours, they saw the arrival of Operation Mallard, 250 gliders carrying reinforcements to the British 6th Airborne Division. Believing this new force threatened their flanks, the division pulled back. They lost 54 tanks and armored vehicles on June 6th, about 25% of their strength in a single day. The counterattack also ran into strange and intimidating machines they had never seen before. The Allies deployed Hobart's funnies, modified tanks designed for specialized roles. Some had flails for clearing mines, others carried flamethrowers or bridge-laying gear. To the Germans, they looked like weapons from another era of warfare altogether. Throughout the day, German soldiers also faced a new problem they were unprepared for: massive airborne forces behind their lines. The British 6th Airborne, along with the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, created chaos far out of proportion to their numbers. Oberst Friedrich von der Heydte, Germany's most experienced paratrooper commander, serving with the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, gave a damning assessment after the war. In his words, "The Allied airborne operation was everything ours had never been: huge, coordinated, and well-supplied. We dropped battalions, they dropped divisions. We relied on single aircraft. They had endless streams of gliders and transports. The psychological effect of paratroopers appearing everywhere broke German cohesion. Some units refused to move, fearing ambush. Others fired wildly at shadows, even at their own troops. Confusion multiplied the defenders' problems again and again. As D-Day wore on, German command and control began to collapse. Allied air power destroyed communication lines. The French resistance activated by coded BBC messages, cut telephone wires and wrecked relay stations. Radio transmissions were jammed by Allied electronic warfare units. By nightfall, the German defense was unraveling on every level. General Lieutenant Max Pemsel, Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, tried to coordinate the defense from his headquarters at Le Mans. His war diary shows his growing frustration as communications with frontline units broke down. By noon on June 6th, entire divisions had dropped off the network. Local commanders were forced to act on their own, without knowing what was happening elsewhere. As night fell on D-Day, the German defenders finally saw the scale of the disaster. The supposedly impregnable Atlantic Wall had been broken in several places. The Luftwaffe was no longer a presence over Normandy. The Kriegsmarine managed to sink just one destroyer, USS Corrie, while losing 15 E-boats and numerous smaller craft. General Major Wilhelm Richter, in charge of the 716th Infantry Division, which faced the full weight of the British landings, reported to 7th Army headquarters, division strength 35%. All coastal strongpoints lost. Artillery 90% destroyed. Enemy advancing inland. The statistics spoke for themselves. Heroic resistance by individuals could not hide the fact that the German defense had failed completely. In one day, German casualties matched those of a major battle, while the Allies landed wave after wave of fresh troops. During the night of June 6th-7th, German forces tried to regroup and launch counterattacks. But Allied superiority was overwhelming. Every movement was spotted by radar, lit up by parachute flares, and then hammered by artillery or naval guns. Hans von Luck's Panzer Grenadiers, finally authorized to attack towards Sword Beach, advanced in darkness. In his memoirs he recalled, "It was as bright as day. Every soldier, every vehicle stood out under the flares. The shells from the destroyers offshore struck with perfect precision. We lost half our strength without ever seeing an enemy soldier." Meanwhile, Allied reinforcements poured in. The prefabricated Mulberry harbors were already being set up. Supply ships were anchored in neat lines. The invasion was no longer a beach landing. It was turning into a permanent base. German attempts to bring reinforcements into Normandy collapsed. Roads, railways, and bridges were under constant Allied air attack. Wehrmacht transportation records show that units which should have reached the front in a single day often took up to 2 weeks. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, based near Toulouse, needed 17 days to arrive. A trip that should have taken 3 days cost them 30% of their vehicles to Allied fighter bombers before they ever reached the battlefield. Morale plummeted. If they could not even reach Normandy intact, how could they hope to fight effectively once there? In contrast, Allied logistics were astonishing. LST's landing ship tank could unload entire armored regiments within hours. Within days of the landings, the Allies were bringing in 15,000 tons of supplies every day, more than the German army in Normandy consumed in an entire week. By June 12th, German forces in Normandy were near collapse. They had lost 26,000 men killed, wounded, or missing, about the strength of 2 full divisions. Reinforcements were scarce. The Allies, by contrast, grew stronger every hour. On June 12th, Carentan fell, linking the American beachheads at Utah and Omaha. The 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, elite paratroopers who had never before retreated, pulled back in disorder. Their commander, Friedrich von der Heydte, reported bluntly, "My regiment no longer exists as a combat unit. The survivors are psychologically broken." On June 13th, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann won one of the few German tactical victories in Normandy. In the Battle of Villers-Bocage, he destroyed 13 to 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 to 15 personnel carriers in about 15 minutes. German propaganda seized on this to show that German arms could still triumph. But even this victory revealed the hopelessness of the situation. Wittmann's Tiger tank, disabled in the fighting, was almost impossible for the Germans to replace. The British losses were replaced within hours. Wittmann himself, credited with 138 tank kills during the war, was killed on August 8th when his Tiger was destroyed, whether by British gunner Joe Ekins of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry or by Canadian forces remains debated. The death of Germany's greatest tank ace showed the brutal reality. The Allies could afford to lose 10 tanks for every Tiger and still win. The fall of Cherbourg on June 26th delivered another blow. This vital port, fortified for 4 years and defended by 21,000 men, was expected to hold out for months. Instead, it fell after just 5 days of heavy fighting. General Lieutenant Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben, who had vowed to fight to the last bullet, surrendered on June 26th. In post-war interrogations, he explained simply, resistance was pointless against an enemy with unlimited resources. This became a common theme in German accounts of the Normandy campaign. On July 25th, the Allies launched Operation Cobra, the decisive breakthrough. According to U.S. Army Air Force records, the opening bombardment involved 1,353 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, and 550 fighter bombers. They dropped more than 4,100 tons of bombs across a strip just 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commander of Panzer Division, reported to Army Group B, "My division is annihilated. The psychological impact on the survivors is beyond description. They are no longer soldiers but broken men." The bombardment was so intense that it killed Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer to die in the European theater, even though he was far from the front line. If American generals were not safe from their own firepower, what chance did German infantry have? The final disaster came at the Falaise Pocket, between August 12th and 21st. Allied intelligence and German records confirmed that around 10,000 Germans were killed and 50,000 captured. Over 300 tanks and armored vehicles were destroyed, along with 2,500 other vehicles. Normandy had become the graveyard of the German army in the West. German soldiers who tried to escape from Normandy later described the battlefield as a nightmare beyond imagination. Roads were covered with dead horses, destroyed tanks, and burning trucks. Allied fighter bombers struck every 20 minutes in relentless waves, while artillery rained down without pause. The destruction was so overwhelming that many soldiers abandoned resistance altogether, surrendering rather than waiting to be killed. The final numbers told the full story of defeat. From June 6th to August 31st, German forces lost about 320,000 men. That figure included 30,000 killed, 80,000 wounded, and 210,000 missing or taken prisoner. They also lost 2,300 tanks, wiping out nearly all their armored strength in France, along with 2,127 aircraft. By comparison, Allied losses were far smaller, 29,672 casualties, and these were replaced faster than they occurred. The Allies lost around 4,000 tanks but replaced them within weeks. and only 401 aircraft out of a force larger. He can replace his losses in days. We cannot replace anything. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, later wrote in 1949 that Normandy proved courage could never overcome industrial power. They had faced an enemy who had mechanized victory itself. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel gave the most sobering assessment. In his final report to Hitler on July 15th, just 2 days before being badly wounded by Allied aircraft, he wrote, "The troops are fighting bravely everywhere, but the unequal battle is nearing its end. The enemy's overwhelming superiority in men and equipment is becoming decisive. I must ask you to draw the necessary conclusions without delay." In military language, this was nothing less than a declaration of defeat. The campaign made clear that World War II had turned into a war of mass production. German troops saw American industry in action, producing equipment on a scale they could not comprehend. Ford's Willow Run factory built one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes at peak output. In 1944 alone, the United States produced 96,000 aircraft. The Allies used more ammunition in one day than Germany could produce in a month. A single American division consumed more supplies daily than an entire German corps. Hans von Luck later reflected in his memoir. "We learned that modern war was not decided by tactics or bravery, but by production." The Americans had turned war into an industrial process. They built victory on assembly lines. Survivors of Normandy carried that lesson for the rest of their lives. Heinrich Sepp, the machine gunner of WN-62, admitted in his 2005 memoir that his 13,500 bullets meant nothing against endless Allied reinforcements. Meeting American veterans decades later, he described all of them as young men thrown into an industrial slaughterhouse. Friedrich von der Heydte, once a proud paratrooper commander, became a professor of international law after the war. He wrote that Normandy proved the era of heroic warriors was finished. Victory now belonged to nations with the strongest industries, not the bravest soldiers. The psychological collapse was total. German troops who had conquered most of Europe now realized that everything they had been told about their own superiority and the weakness of their enemies was false. They had expected to crush divided democracies, but instead they faced a united coalition that had turned war into a perfectly organized machine. For soldiers like Heinrich Sepp, June 6th began with the belief that the invasion would be stopped on the beaches. It ended with him surrounded by empty shell casings, watching wave after wave of Allied reinforcements pour ashore. His personal story reflected the broader German tragedy. Individual courage and skill could not survive the sheer mathematics of modern war. The beaches of Normandy became more than a battlefield. They became a lesson in the future of warfare. German defenders brought their training, discipline, and courage. The Allies brought limitless tanks, planes, ships, and supplies. Against that, bravery meant little. The German soldiers fought until their weapons overheated, until ammunition was gone, and still the Allies kept coming. By the end, those who survived understood history's harshest truth. In an industrial war, nations that cannot match their enemy's production are doomed, no matter the skill of their soldiers. On June 6th, they had marched to battle as warriors of the Third Reich. By the campaign's end, they were witnesses to the arsenal of democracy in full power. The invasion they promised to throw back into the sea had instead swept them away, destroying not only their armies, but the very foundation of the Nazi dream.